What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Coachable podcast. I'm so excited that you're here for another week because I am joined by none other than Alexandra Solomon. She is a creator and host of the Reimagining Love, Taking Sexy Back, How to Own Your Sexuality and Create the Relationships You Want, and Loving Bravely, 20 Lessons of Self-Discovery to help you get what you want when it comes to love. She's also been featured on the Today Show, NPR, and so many other news outlets. And she's a licensed clinical psychologist at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. She's taught a course there called Marriage 101 for the last 20 years and a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Northwestern University. You can find out all about her on social media, Dr. Alexandra Solomon, or at her website, dralexandra.solomon.com. All of this will be linked in the show notes, and you're in for a treat because in today's episode, we talk all about relational self-awareness and how you can begin to develop it so that you can understand yourself, your partner better, and you can create the love and intimate relationships that you desire, because you guys know that this can be a challenging space to navigate, whether you're in partnership, whether you're dating, single, going through separation. This is going to be a episode that I know is going to serve you and give you some aha moments that you can take away, and you can dive deeper into your self-healing journey and developing the intimacy that you crave. We want to be known, we want to be seen, we want to be loved deeply. All of us want these things, but it can feel so elusive and hard to come by. But Dr. Alexandra Solomon really breaks it down for us in this episode, so I know you are going to love it. Before we jump into this week's episode, I do want to say thank you to our sponsor, Organifi, which is a line of organic superfood blends that offer plant-based nutrition and high-quality ingredients with less than 3 grams of sugar. I absolutely love Organifi because, as you guys know, I'm traveling these days across the country, and I need something that's convenient but works. And with their incredible travel size packets, this works really, really well for me being on the go. You can get their Organifi greens, their Organifi red, or what I love, the Organifi gold, and make sure that not only does it taste good, but you're getting the superfoods that are essential for your diet to reduce stress and reset your morning into your routines. I absolutely love all of their products. So if you go to Organifi.com/Tori Gordon and use the code Tori20, you will get 20% off all of your order. Dr. Alexandra Solomon, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Super honored to share just a couple minutes together, because you're somebody who I highly admire and I respect your work deeply, and I appreciate the way that you see yourself, and therefore how you offer us a way to see ourselves more deeply and more clearly through the work that you do. And that's what I'm excited to talk to you about today. So just first of all, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tori, for having me. That's a sweet introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm fascinated by the work that you do and your background as a clinical psychologist and also a professor. I grew up as a child to 2 educators and professors myself, and so I value education, and I say if I could be a student for life, I would be, and I do think I am to some extent. But you have taught a course called Marriage 101 at a collegiate level, which is so fascinating that this is something that has even been offered, and why we're not all educated in such an important topic. And you teach about, obviously, marriage, the fundamentals of what goes into healthy relational dynamics, but also what you call relational self-awareness. And before we get into all of the other things that I just mentioned, I would love for you just to define what relational self-awareness is for those listening and why it's so critical when we desire to have healthy, intimate relationships.
Great. I think you're starting us off in just the right place. So you're right. I mean, I wear a number of different hats, but what I was beginning to realize I wear a number of hats in my professional world, and certainly as a wife of 26 something years and a mama to two teenagers, the through line, no matter the context that I'm in, is this idea of relational self-awareness. So what I want for my students, my clients, as well as for myself, is to again and again come back to relationship with self as the foundation of relationship with everybody else. So relational self-awareness is an ongoing, curious and compassionate relationship that I foster with myself that becomes the foundation for healthy relationships of all kind. I mean, usually I'm talking about in terms of intimate partnership, but certainly when I'm, in a conversation with my adolescent daughter, I can come up with all kinds of judgments about her, beliefs about what she should be doing or not doing. And my challenge is to be humble enough and curious enough to understand, why am I getting hooked, right? Why is my opinion getting so strong right now? Why is my reaction getting so large right now? What is going on inside of me that is getting activated? And that ability to turn attention inward, to hold up that mirror, always gently, because this is challenging, but that the relationship with self then becomes the foundation for intimacy and for connection.
Yeah. I think it's Viktor Frankl who says, in between stimulus and response, there's a pause. And in that pause, if we're able to notice the story that we're telling ourselves, notice the trigger, notice just the sensation in our body that's happening, whatever is being brought up as a byproduct of this conversation or this thing that just happened with my partner or with a friend or with my daughter, right? That it's, can we increase that pause long enough to inquire within ourselves? Because to your point, I think what's most natural and automatic for most of us, our default setting is reactivity and self-protection, right? And how do I protect myself from pain at all costs? And that oftentimes prohibits us from being able to connect at the deep level that we really desire to, because we're just going around with armor all day long and creating stories and judgments about the people in our lives that we really desire to know and to be known by. Right. And this is something that I know, not just myself, but all of the listeners, including you, like, we're all trying to figure this thing out when it comes to relationship. It's one of the things that's primary in our DNA. We are wired for connection. We need it to survive. And whether it's from childhood and birth to co-regulate, just to be, just to get through, when we're young, to adulthood, and we're really craving those intimate partnerships. And it seems to be something that many of us feel like we're lacking the right tools in this area.
That's right.
And so I think it's so critical, the work that you do, and equipping people like myself and your clients and those that you work with, to how do we expand that pause and learn how to go within, as you said, and start to notice those dynamics within ourselves, and also the relationships that we continue to carry in our lives.
Yep. It's, we're having this conversation at an incredibly exciting time. One of the fascinating things about being now 2+ decades into this work is that, 20 years ago, so for example, I've been a therapist for more than 20 years, and around 20 years ago is when we first launched the Marriage 101 class, and we were really pulling together what we knew then from the body of relationship science, what we knew from the field of couples therapy, and we were really piecing this together. And it was at the very early edge of starting to translate that which lived behind therapist doors and within the ivory tower into the hands of 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And so what's happened over these 2 decades is this explosion of information and conversation and democratization of wellness and mental health. And it's so exciting that my students will come in. They can tell me their attachment styles. They know their love languages. Like this is, I'm not starting from the square one that I used to start from. So the field has expanded. Our willingness to know that we have to humble ourselves, right, and heal in an ongoing way. Like it's quite exciting, and it makes me really hopeful for what's to come, even as I feel frightened and concerned about things like the impact of a 2+ year long pandemic on our relationships, right? Because we are asking, you're talking about that pause, the Viktor Frankl pause, which I just so cherish. And it's in my slide deck on lecture 1 of Marriage 101. It's in Loving Bravely. Like that quote is just essential. And so we are asking ourselves to inhabit a pause while we are walking around really quite threadbare, right? We are in the midst of a collective grief. All of us are more at risk than ever, I think, to be falling back on whatever our self-protective urges are. And for some of us, it's lashing out and getting critical and judgy and finger pointy and blamey. For some of us, it's like hunkering down and like becoming a turtle and going within and shutting down. So we have different places that we go, but you're right, that urge to self-protect is there within all of us. And external stressors, whether it's a relational stressor, a work stressor, or this large macro pandemic stressor, puts us all at risk of being much more reactive than responsive. So the work isn't done. I know for myself, my leading edge is always, I would love to get to the point where I am just no longer reactive, impossible to trigger. I'm not there yet. I got some more years to go. Maybe I'll get there. But what I'm better at is shrinking the time between when my self-protective strategy emerges and I catch it and I repair, I ask for a do-over, I acknowledge, I start again, right? That's where our growth is can we catch it and do it differently? That's where I hope that we, these tools that you're offering on your show that I love to offer are helping move us towards.
Yeah, I think it is. That's the process. It's like, how can I shrink that time that I go to those protectors and allow for and create the space within myself to be with whatever is coming up and reparent that part of me, love on that part of me, have compassion for that part of me that feels the need to like lash out or act out because something in my environment right now doesn't feel safe. And I think this is really important for those of us, whether we're dating or in relationship. Anybody that's listening to the show, that's really, if you're listening to the show, it's because you want to develop more relational self-awareness. So you're on this self-discovery journey, and it's like, what is it within me that is being triggered in this scenario? And I always tell people, it's like, my triggers are my roadmap to my healing, because it shows me where my wounds are. I think it's Marianne Williamson says, it's like, the people who are meant to teach us the most in our lives are the ones that show us our capacity, basically to love. And where our wounds, like where our walls are, that's where our wounds are. Like where I go to, hey, this is unforgivable, or this is something I can't accept. And that doesn't mean we don't have standards or boundaries or anything, but it's understanding that our relationships are really meant to be a place of healing, right? Because our wounds happen in relationship, but healing has to happen in relationship too. To come that full circle, if we really want to. We can do the work on our own, but at some point, if we've been abandoned, neglected in relationships, if we have issues of like we don't trust someone, in order to really bring that full circle, do you see that yes, we can work on those stories and repatterning and creating new, experiences in the future, but doesn't it come full circle when we actually live that out in partnership with someone else?
Absolutely. That's right. That's right. And it's not that we go, we don't get to go into relationship and say, okay, so here's my deal. I have an abandonment wound and this wound. And
Yeah.
this. So therefore, don't touch it, don't trigger it, don't activate it. We don't get to do that. So it's this blend, as you're saying, of tending to ourselves, providing that self-soothing and reparenting and gentleness, while also asking for measures of accommodation and agreement that minimize the chances that our partner is going to inadvertently, stumble onto our wounds. I think it's this blend, and we can't make like a flow chart of like, if this, then this, so it has to be this willingness, like, and the more that I'm willing to say, yes, Tori, like that conversation last night triggered me because it reminded me of this thing with my mom. The more I can do that, then the more you'll be able to say, well, you know what, as you say that, it's making me realize that part of my reaction to what you're saying is shaped by this old story that I bring in about how I'm not enough, or I'm going to be misunderstood. So it's not that we ever even have to have this nice, neat diagram of how much it's my ghost, causing the dust up versus your ghost, but just that process of being curious about what's going on within and between is intimacy promoting. And given that the research shows, John Gottman's research shows that a full 69% of the shit that couples fight about is unsolvable anyways, that really is usually where we're going to end up, is just some blend of me taking accountability for my shit, you taking accountability for yours, and we just kind of like shrug our shoulders and say, wow, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that we can just end up in these places,
Yeah. Well, and that just, I think, blows up this fantasy that we're going to meet somebody and we're not going to, have these big disagreements, or, we're always going to want the same things, or we're going to have the same needs, or that we're not going to have a lot of conflict. It's just, to your point, regardless of the relationship that you're in, there will be those things that you're like, we can't solve this. And do we choose to continue to be in this dance together, despite the fact that we're not coming to there's no right, or somebody's not right in this, no one wins.
That's right.
In this isn't a competition.
Yep. But we sure have been sold a lot of mythology that if we choose right, then we won't feel misunderstood, feel confused, feel overwhelmed. And so that is, and I think there are lots of ways that modern dating can reinforce that, right? Because literally we're sitting on a device choosing, right? Like swiping this way or that way. So there's a lot of wind in our face around that, like supporting and reinforcing the idea that if I just choose the right person, it's not going to hurt and it's going to be easy. And I don't, relationships, at least in the context we're talking about, are free will arrangements. And so I never want anyone to stay past the point just because there might be more growth involved. Like I'm not here for that.
Right.
But I am here for grieving and letting go of the myth that if you truly, if you're the right one for me, then I won't ever feel misunderstood or confused or doubtful or hesitant, right?
Yeah. That is, I think, really hitting on something I want to dive deeper into, which is I hear a lot of, primarily women, I'm sure there are men that say this too, but they'll say, I have a bad picker, right? I just have a bad picker. And I kind of get where they're coming from in terms of maybe they've kind of unconsciously chosen similar partners that are bringing up certain wounds for them that they get to work on if they see that pattern. But also to your point about this pressure to choose right, and that if I choose wrong, choosing wrong equals suffering, and choosing right means a life of happily ever after. And when we fall into that paradigm, we are going to inevitably suffer because, one, there is no such thing, right? I guess of like, there is no perfect person. And also we have lost our ability to trust ourselves, to choose a partner that is aligned for us. Because at the first sight of issues or conflict or somebody's shadow, it's like, oh gosh, I got to leave because this isn't the, the perfect person for me.
Yeah, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because that whole like I have a bad picker. There's a part of it that may be a statement someone's making about what you're saying. I don't trust my ability to choose, and that is what oftentimes early trauma robs us of, is an ability to trust ourselves.
Yeah.
So what somebody might be saying in that is, it's really, really hard for me to trust myself. And so, and that goes throughout everything in my life. And so if that is what that declaration is saying, I'm wanting them to do some healing around devotion to small choices, like just throughout the day, noticing when they actually do choose for themselves, when they choose wisely, when they choose lovingly, and like landing that, right? Like noticing that moment of like, I stood there, even something as simple as I stood there in the coffee shop, I looked at that enormous menu of coffee drinks, and I looked and I read and I made a choice, and this is a freaking good cup of coffee. And just like noting that and like landing it inside, like just whispering to the little girl, little boy, like, look at us, like we're doing it.
Yeah.
We are choosing for ourselves, like devotion to those little small choices that indicate that actually there is a deep well of inner knowing that is trustworthy, that can be relied upon, and then expanded into things that are far more complicated than choosing a coffee drink. But that is sometimes where the healing has to start, is in the little spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to talk to you about is our definitions of love, and how those, and just what traditional relationships have looked like for many of us, what our parents' relationships look like, what their parents' relationships look like, what we learned from our family of origin, and about what love is, and what relationships should look like, and how that's evolving in 2022. How does it look different today than what we were sold from, whether it's our parents or on TV or something in the culture, because there is a shift that's happening. Dating today, relationships today look much different. There's much more space and open conversation around gender roles, around non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, around, relationships that are just expanding what our original idea of what that should look like in a monogamous relationship, and how that traces back to our family of origin. Can you just speak to that a little bit, and how we start our idea of love is shaped at a young age?
Oh, Tori, you're so good. You've got this whole map right down. Yeah, I think that is a really, there's ways in which this part of the conversation gets a little bit like kind of heady and sociological and historical, but I think it's so important, because it's like telling the goldfish they're in water, right? Like it just, if what somebody's doing is dating in 2022, they all that you can see is the current zeitgeist, right? The current moment. And so it's in being like, let's look at where you are and how you basically are loving and looking for love in this like freaking brave new world. And you are doing what literally no humans have ever done before. And it's in that conversation that it's like, oh, wait a minute. This is hard because it's hard, not because I'm broken or wrong or stupid or haven't figured it out. So yes, there's a chapter in, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the why it's futile, like it's futile to compare ourselves to our parents, or relationships that we think it's supposed to look like. Oh, well, I should have a relationship like they did, or I wish I had a relationship like my grandparents because they were married for 50 years. Your grandparents aren't dating in 2022. They just weren't. Whether they were set up by their, they could have been set up by family members. They could have just she could have been the only girl in the classroom. Who knows, But it's just right. Things are different. So right. Yeah, let's shed some light on that, because I think it gives people relief when we start to realize like, oh, I'm not doing it wrong. I don't maybe have context for what I want to create, because I've never seen it done before. Right. And when we're trying to create a new reality of love, reimagining what love could look like, and we've never seen it before, it can feel like you're wandering around in the dark, and you're just kind of like bracing your, like trying to feel like what can I hold on to, because you don't have an example to follow.
Right. Right. And it does not mean that we have to throw our grandparents' love stories under the bus, sure. Right? I think this is the beautiful thing, is how do we honor lineage, tradition, the sort of inheritance, while also becoming discerning about, this is what I love and cherish and am so grateful for, right? This is what my grandparents' love story taught me and embedded in me. And here's how I'm going to transform it or create something that is different, that has echoes or resonances or tributes to, while transforming and evolving. So that, I think, is the challenge of can we sit in that space of continuity and change? Because if for no other reason, as you're saying, we have to, right? We can't have our grandparents' love stories because the context is just different. And then there are lots of ways that we don't want to, like particularly it changes around gender role expectations. Yeah. Like, and even if we would like to grasp, sort of traditional heterosexual gender norms and roles, we literally cannot, because the economy has changed such that the female breadwinner households are pretty much the norm. Like the percentage, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was like single digits a generation or two ago, where it would be a female breadwinner household or a woman who out-earned a man. And now it is nearly 50-50 of which one is going to earn more than the other. What we have not yet done is gone nearly far enough to expand our possibilities around what it means to be a provider, right? Like we had one notion that if you are a man and you are a provider, you provide with a paycheck. Well, I spend lots of parts of my week sitting with couples, especially straight couples, where if she out earns him, we get to reimagine what providing looks like, right? What else does he provide? What are the yummy, juicy things that he brings to the table while she brings, but this is not easy. And oftentimes the three of us, the couple and I, are working against all the people who are whispering in their ears about, can you believe that he didn't? And can you believe that she? And none of that is helpful, because it is difficult enough to subvert scripts that are very, very old without having the added pressure of a bunch of people spouting off and weighing in while we try to do our work.
Ooh, there is so much what you just said, and I want to get to the original question, but you were just saying, I mean, that is so true in terms of just the data, what the data is saying about how things have changed with gender roles and providing. And that is, I have personally experienced that myself. And I was on Instagram today and saw a post someone had written about how, basically this type of thing is women leading in their masculine. Like if a woman is the breadwinner, that means she's dominating in her masculine, and she's, demasculating her man, and a man needs, her, like, there are so many stories, there are so many narratives, and it can feel overwhelming to, like, it's like this braid, that we're trying to weave, and we're like, which parts are in this, and which do I, like, don't belong, and that's why therapy is so, like, such a sacred space for so many people, because it's like, all of this noise is really overwhelming and noisy when I'm out in the world, and then maybe in a really safe dynamic, whether it's with a therapist or a coach or whatever, I can start to kind of navigate and see what's mine, what's not mine, what has just been like,
That's right.
what have I just accepted that someone else said to me, but what do I get to like discard that doesn't serve me anymore?
That's right. Oh, I agree with that so much. I agree with that so much because there's such a fear, like in this scenario that we're talking about, right? I think that she would understandably have a fear that if she, quote unquote, allows it to be this way, that somehow she's a sucker or she's a fool or she's a doormat. And if they have the privilege of somebody who's right up next to them, a therapist or a coach, the therapist or coach can say, but how do you feel? What are your truths? What do you know? And she may say something like, what I know is when I'm lying in his arms, I feel safe and held and seen in a way that I haven't before. And I know the goodness of him, and I know what we are about, and I know that we are doing what needs to be done at this time in our relationship, right? There might be things that truths that she can anchor back in on, but my gosh, there's a lot of fear of what we're missing, what's being omitted, as you're saying, that braid of like what's in and what do we get to let go of, because it doesn't have a couple's love story is there. They deserve it to belong to them,
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to take it back to that family of origin and how we, like our first inclination and definition and idea of what relationships look like and what love is. Because as you know, what we learn as children, then we go out and often mimic in adulthood until we realize or reclaim that definition and get to define marriage or love for ourselves based on what our values are, not what we've been told it has to look like, or we're unconsciously kind of living out patterns from our lineage that have just been repeated over and over, and I'll get it started by saying, for me, although my parents were married for over 36 years, my mom passed away in 2018 after a battle with ovarian cancer. My dad was very, very committed to our family and to that partnership, and yet there was so much that I learned about their marriage and what it took to survive and get through all of those years, that I had no clue about when I was younger, right? And until my mom passed, where my dad and I really got to bond, and I got to understand what was, as I was getting older and having my own relationships, what theirs was really like. Because as a byproduct of really trying to understand myself, I wanted to understand my family of origin. I wanted to understand my mom and her dynamics and what she was like in relationship. I wanted to understand my dad and what they were like together, because I wanted to know, is this me, or is this something I'm reenacting that I've seen before? Right? And to that point, I think one of the things I learned about love was that love is sacrifice. And I've seen that in my adult life play out, and that's one of the things I have been redefining for myself, because it showed up in a lot of self-abandonment and self-neglect of, I'll just forego my needs for you, and I'll kind of be the martyr in the relationship, and I'll, because I'm sacrificing myself for the greater good in that sense. Right. But we all have different definitions of what that looks like based on how we grow up, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, there's so much that's really important and really touching in what you're describing, that in the loss of your mama, there's a different kind of conversation opening up between you and your dad. And I suspect there's a couple of things happening at once. Like, these conversations may have begun to open or shift anyways, just as you step more deeply into your own intimate partnerships. But I hear in your story that there was something also about the loss of your mom that really like cracked this open, perhaps in a different way. And there's something so like beautiful and humble about your dad being willing to like let you look behind some of the curtains and layers, right? There's that is what parents, it's appropriate, right? We want, when family therapists think about a healthy family system, there's a sense that there's a parental subsystem or the parental unit, and there's a boundary between that system and the younger generation, and that is a gift and it's a blessing to offer your kids that kind of boundary where the kids don't
have
and
insight.
It's for those. Oh my
Yeah.
Lord. Right. Like, that's called triangulation, right? Like if mom is going to daughter to talk shit about dad, that is a cross-generational alliance that does nothing but deteriorate the marriage and really, really hurt the kid who now has to figure out how to carry deep love and loyalty to dad while, supporting mom. So I love that there was a sense that you didn't know this full story. There was a lot that was going on that had to do with sacrifice and the greater good and the stability of the unit that you didn't know about, you didn't hear about, but you likely felt the security of, like you got to be the beneficiary of that. People were sacrificing and you got to just perhaps be a little bit a little blind to all of it,
Which presented its own challenges when I did come
Sure.
into it. It was like everything I thought sort of crumbled, and I got to rebuild it in a more beautiful way in my own mind about the stories I told. But I think I totally understand that that need for separation there, for protection of myself and anybody else that's going through that. But that's just an example, I think, of one kind of story that some of us have. I know my clients have found themselves kind of replaying over and over in their adult relationships. It's like that love equals even in growing up where I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, in the Bible Belt. I mean, you're told that every day when you go to church. If you want to be loving, sacrifice yourself, and that's the way to be good.
Yep. Right. So you had a couple of forces converging. Your gender, because certainly we give that message a lot more loudly to our girls and our women. And you had, the religious context, there were a lot, and then your family context. So for sure. Yeah. But that's, what you're doing, like you are using yourself as an example right now of something that I want each and every one of us to do, which is to study what I call our original love classroom. Okay. Right. So when all of us are little, we are absorbing messages, implicitly and explicitly, consciously and unconsciously. And the messages are of two types. Type 1 is we're watching how the big people talk to each other, behave with each other, how they handle emotions, the roles, tension. So we're observing those dynamics, and then we're also relating to. So we are becoming who the big people in the house need us to be, right? And depending on how stressed out or dysfunctional our family is, we may have gotten locked into a particular role, right? One of the signs of a healthy family system is the little people don't have to have a role. You can be the goofy one day and the smart one the next day and the silly one the next day and the serious one the next. Like you can just be the full 360 version of yourself. In families that are stressed or dysfunctional, people get cast into roles. There's the golden child, there's the scapegoat, there's the invisible one, right? So that's the other way that we absorb those messages is like, okay, who do y'all need me to be so that there can be stability and predictability in this system? And both those sets of messages, the observational ones and the ones that have to do with who we think we need to be for other people's benefit, those all need to get unpacked because, as you're saying, they all come with us as our baggage in our intimate relationships, which is not a bad thing. It's just, we all have it. It's just the question is, are we going to look at it and kind of tease apart how it gets in the way, how it creates blind spots, how it creates expectations?
Yeah. Because I think in our culture, we're in love with falling in love, and then you get through that 12-month period where everybody's on their best behavior and everybody's playing the role of who I think you want me to be so that you'll love me and that you'll stick around a lot of times, not always, depending on where you are in your relational awareness and your journey with that. But there is I was actually talking to a friend last night who I think you've been on his show, Nico, about this. And we were talking about just this illusion that we kind of this perception that we have of people, and then you get to know them and you start to get to know their baggage and you get to know their shadows, and this perception changes. And then for a lot of people, that's when dating's no longer fun. The relational relationships no longer interesting to me. Now I'll go on and I'll stay in that period. I like a lot of people want to stay in that fun season until the baggage kind of gets opened up, and then no longer people don't want to stick around for sifting through that. Oftentimes in the dating culture.
Yeah. Okay, well, what'd you guys figure out?
Well, that's all.
What was your conclusion?
Yeah, it's all an illusion that anybody is, it's silly to think that there won't be a time where you start to see the things that the insecurities, the things that people struggle with, whatever that is, and can, based on where you are in your own relationship to self, the more compassionate I am and with myself, the more I know my own internal baggage or challenges, the more compassion I can have for somebody else and what they've gone through. And so I have a greater capacity to sit with and hold space for somebody else's stuff. That doesn't mean I take it on as my own, but I think it's directly proportionate to the work that you've done personally on yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yep. I love that. And it means, I think around everything, we're at risk of getting really binary. Like either this is the greatest love story or this is a terrible love story. And when that shift happens, like what I call the fall from grace, like that sort of shift from I'm more complicated than perhaps you've seen thus far, and you're more complicated than perhaps I've seen thus far, that even though we're shifting away from that and there's some grief in it, what we get to still have admiration, right? Like admiration, respect. We maybe even get to either within our own minds or together, like reminisce about, oh my God, remember in the beginning when it was just like so hot or so seductive or so like mysterious. So we can maybe talk together about those earlier times when we hadn't added all these layers and you hadn't held me while I weep and I hadn't, watched how much your mom demeans you sometimes,
Right.
Whatever it is. Can we talk together about those memories of the early days without idealizing the early days, but just sort of saying like, isn't that so wild? Like where we started and how we've come, and that in the more nuanced experience of self and other, there still gets to be admiration, and there gets to be, we get to be a bit more real, that we hopefully, as we're being challenged to hold on to our partner's nuances and complexities, there also gets to be a relief that we get to be held with more nuance and complexity, that we don't have to be, some sort of role or fantasy of what the perfect partner is. So there gets to hopefully be some relief along with that grief.
Yeah, I love that, because I think there can be this unconscious pressure that a lot of us feel, this like need to impress people. And I've worked a lot on this personally, where I'm like, this is who I am. You know what I mean? As I've gotten to know myself more, I'm very open about my past, my struggles, the things I work through, and I'm pretty transparent about that. However, there can be this fear, this like fall from grace of, what if I'm not who they think I am? Or what if they see me, what if they see me differently if they know X, Y, and Z about me? And so we guard those parts of us in fear of judgment, in fear of being rejected, in fear of being left, ultimately. And I think there is a season for people to go through of recognizing that fear that keeps us, and shame that keeps us hiding, is also the thing that keeps us from deep intimacy too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I My gosh, I mean, I'm flashing on all these moments in my marriage with Todd. Like we're decades into this thing, and I still will feel myself tightening up around like, how is he perceiving me? And does he still look at me the way that he
Right.
used to? Or does he hold me in high esteem? Or have I disappointed him so deeply? Right. And likewise with me, with him, like, how, like, can I have a fresh experience of this man that I have seen again?
Yeah.
So it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. It is, fear of loss is woven into love. So but what you're saying is so spot on, that like the more gently we can sit with ourselves, the more we can trust all of it. But it's not, it really, I don't know. I mean, I've yet to solve it. It's not solvable, right? It's not to be solved. It's just to be held with tenderness.
That was the word.
Really.
Is tenderness. Yeah, it's tender.
Yeah.
It feels. Yeah. So those are the spots that just feel so vulnerable and tender, and it's such a gift when we are in partnership with somebody who can meet us in those places and still hold us with that respect and admiration. And I imagine that's a lifelong process of moving through those seasons together. And so I appreciate what you just shared about that. I want to ask you one other question, because this is around just really being honest with ourselves and with our partners in relationship. I think a lot of times I see a lot of stuff on social media about, we want to be chosen, right? We want to be chosen by, the person that chooses you. Like, if the one who's for you, you won't be confused. You're going to know they're going to choose you. And I had this thought the other day, that as I have worked on my own relational awareness, I have recognized that sometimes not choosing someone doesn't make them necessarily a bad person. It might just make them an honest one. And I think sitting and wrestling with that for some of us who have felt like we weren't chosen is, I'm curious just to get your thoughts on that, because a lot of times we want to demonize people who don't maybe reciprocate what we feel, or they don't want to be with us the way we want to be with them. And so we kind of, we like demonize them. Like they're such bad guys, or she hurt me because of this. But what if we could just hold space for, what if they were just being honest? What if they were just saying, this is my capacity and this isn't for me, or this isn't aligned for me, instead of creating this whole judgment, which I think a lot of us jump to, or story about, if it's, you don't choose me, that means something about you as a byproduct,
Right. It's like, it feels like a massive game of hot potato, right? Like, if you don't choose me, one of us has to be bad or wrong. And so the idea that to not be like, that's really painful. If I have declared, I really want this, I'm here, I like you, let's build something, and you take a pass, that hurts like hell. That's really painful. And so can I... Right, it's really hard to hold that pain, and it's really tempting to whoosh, like just flip back on you, that you were wrong, limited, because it's hard to hold pain, right? And depending on what else is going on in it's a coping strategy, right? So depending on my capacity, like it's a subtle difference between holding the pain of not being chosen and turning it against myself, right? That's a subtle difference that sometimes we slip right over. We don't even notice. Like, I'm so sad you didn't choose me. Quickly and sneakily becomes, you didn't choose me because I'm not whatever, thin enough, beautiful enough, rich enough, funny enough, enough. And so can we just notice when the pain starts to veer into shame? Because the more it does that, now I'm at risk of like putting it back on you, because it's got to be, right? It's either I turn against myself or I turn against you. So it's that again, like, can I just have the capacity to just hold the pain and just hold the disappointment and the sadness of what is not going to be without having to make it one of our faults. And that's hard. It's hard, but it's very different. I think it's different to dive all the way into you're terrible or I'm terrible versus noticing like, look at that. It's so tempting. I want to make you wrong, or I want to beat myself up and figure out how I'm going to lose 5 pounds so that I can da 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 da. Noticing that and being fully immersed in that are radically different things. And I think it's the noticing, damn, I'm watching myself be so tempted to take this out on me, and I notice it, and I'm not going to do it. I used to do it, and I'm not going to do it anymore. So that's, I think, where the work and the healing are, right?
The most courageous thing we can do is nothing. Not go to the typical response we have, which is making you wrong or making me wrong, like just being with it, right? Just being.
Which is it's just so hard. It's just so hard. But it becomes easier, right, as we trust that sadness won't engulf us, right? And some of us come into it. Some of us really have watched people be engulfed by sadness. If you grew up with a depressed parent who really was engulfed by their sadness, you'll do just about anything to avoid sadness, including move into shame and, kickstart a whole self-improvement program or, whatever. So I get that. But yes, you're right. Sometimes the best thing we can do is nothing and just let ourselves be sad, knowing that it's an arc. It's a wave. We're sad. We're caring for ourselves. We're staying hydrated. We're reaching out to a friend, and then the next day it's a little less sad and a little less sad. And it becomes like any grief. It becomes a bit smaller, a bit less intrusive, and there's a bit more of us existing, around that pain point.
I know you have a couple of online courses. If people are interested and they're like, okay, I need more of this. Y'all hit on some topics that are like hot topics for me, and I want to know more. Can you talk a little bit about where they can go and what they can find in the courses that you offer?
Sure. Yeah, there's lots of places to go, right? The sort of, I have a podcast now called Reimagining Love, a weekly show, and I've got a couple of books, Loving Bravely and Taking Sexy Back. And then you're right, there's a couple of courses that are both available at courses.dralexandrasolomon.com. One is called Intimate Relationships 101. It's just a comprehensive introduction to relational and sexual self-awareness. Then the other one is called Can I Trust You Again? It's about rebuilding after betrayal or deceit, and it's something you can take on your own or ideally with a partner that you're trying to explore restoration with.
So good. So good. We're going to have you back on to talk about all the other things that we could have gotten into today. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for your work and your openness and transparency and your wisdom that you brought to the show. So needed. You're helping so many people. And I think, I can't say it enough. Like, this is what's going to revolutionize love and relationships if we're willing to sit with those parts of ourselves and learn how to tend to the places that we have neglected within ourselves so that we can show up in our relationships more fully and give the love that we want to receive and vice versa. So thank you so much. And you guys, if you love this show, you know what to do. Go follow Dr. Alexandra Solomon on Instagram. Make sure that you take a screenshot of this episode. Tag us. We want to know what your takeaways were. And you can always say thank you by giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple, iTunes, or Spotify. Until next week, go be coachable. I love you guys. Thank you for tuning in.